So first things first, how did everybody do on the assignment? I went through and graded them. They all looked really well. How did you feel about it?
I felt pretty good about it.
Yeah? It was pretty simple, right? So it gets easier. If you want to make an update, if you have a note, or if you still haven't submitted something, then please do so. HTML at this is really pretty simple. It starts to get complicated because we're going to start nesting the tags. So when you have a label tag or a paragraph tag and it's by itself, then that's pretty easy to follow. But we're going to start nesting the tags, and things can get a little hairy when you start doing that. Okay. As a reminder, this is a partially online course, so we meet once a week, and then you're going to be expected to do some research and some investigation on your own. Sometimes that will be videos that I send you. Sometimes it will just be reading. Sometimes it'll be looking up information on websites. Okay. So if you thought you were taking the course because it only met once a week and was going to be easier, that is not the case. This course is likely harder than taking an in-person class 2 times a week, because you get less time with me and you have more time you have to look up things on your own. So you have to be a little bit of an autodidact and a little bit of a self-starter to get that work done. Okay. So anyway, it's totally doable, but you're gonna be expected to do some work on your own outside of class using the tools that we have: JS Fiddle, W3 Schools, Stack Overflow, the textbook, etc. Okay. All right. Any questions about the assignment or anything that you wanted me to go over? It was all pretty straightforward, and everybody's submission looked pretty good. So, okay. All right. Let's jump back in. We're going to run through some more HTML tags, and then we are going to look at this week's assignment. So, the assignments for the next 2 weeks are posted online. So we have week 2. We're going to do nested HTML form. A nested HTML form. Then week 3, we're going to start. Week 3 will be our last week where we focus solely on HTML. And we're going to do a starter assignment there in week 3. The week 4 assignment will be completing the week 3 assignment. So you need to finish week 3 because week 4 requires you to have week 3 done. Okay. Starting in week 4, we're going to start talking about CSS. And we'll talk about that for maybe 2 weeks. And then we're going to jump into JavaScript. So and then after a week or so of JavaScript, we're going to start bringing it all together. Okay? All right. So let's run through our slides again. So we talked about the HTML sections: the head, the body, and the content sections. So the head is always at the top. The body is where all the content goes. We talked about the header section. This is where you include titles for the web page. If you're including external scripts or external style sheets, you would include links and references to them here. When you're in the body, this is where all your content goes. So these are all your paragraphs, your labels, your links, all of your content pieces, all the data that's being rendered by the browser. Okay, we did a little bit of an example on the header tags, on text tags. So remember that we talked about the structure of a tag being that you have the opening section of the tag. So this is an H1 tag, and it's enclosed in angled brackets. And so this is the opening section of the tag. When you close the tag, you use the same tag that you opened with, but you precede it with a slash. This is the closing tag. Okay? Every tag must have a closing tag. If you leave out the closing tag, the browser might render your sheet correctly, might not, might. It just kind of depends on which one you left out. Okay? Also, in the opening tag, we see here in this paragraph tag, we see that we can include attributes. So this is an ID. This IDs are unique. They describe that specific instance of the paragraph tag, so that you can use that to interact with the page using CSS or JavaScript. Okay. So we talked about ID and class. Those were 2 of the elements that we discussed. Here we talked about the attributes of the tags. Like the image has a source tag, href for a link tag. ID and class are the common tags. These apply to every tag that's out there, as some others that might apply as well. Class and ID are the most common tags that are ubiquitous and the most common attributes that are ubiquitous for every tag. Okay, so we did headings in your homework assignment. So these are simply different sizes of text. There's a default for every heading size that's rendered by your browser, for a default for size and font weight, which is the boldness of the font, and also the default font that's being used. So that's just built into the browser. You can use style sheets later on when we get into that to format any of these tags as you want. Okay. We talked a little bit about underline and emphasis and highlighting and these small and del tags. These are older tags in the HTML format. Okay. These tags are really presentation. They affect the way that the text looks on the screen, which is really presentation of the data, of the document. Remember we talked about the separation in HTML being the structure of the document. These are the pieces of the document, the sections of the document that are going to be rendered in the browser. We talked about using CSS to handle the presentation of that. So presentation would be the color of the text or the background, the size of the text, the shape of an image. All of those things are presentation and are best done in CSS. So some of these text formatting tags, they're all still supported, but many of them are deprecated in the interest of using CSS instead of HTML. However, you can still use them if you choose to. Okay? We talked about, did we talk about the break tag, the BR tag? I don't think we did. But the break tag just puts a space, just puts a new line in between the previous tag and the next tag. So if you want to put a line break inside of a paragraph, or you just need to separate some two elements when you're rendering in the browser, a break tag is a way to do that. And a break tag is a singleton tag in that it doesn't have a closing attribute. Okay? It's a little bit of a sledgehammer approach. A better approach if you're trying to put space in your document is to use the presentation layer using CSS and to use padding and margin and things like that to move them around. Okay? However, break tags work just as well. Okay? Labels and paragraphs. Anybody get the difference between a label and a paragraph when you were exploring this in your assignment? What's the key difference? There's not a lot of difference, but what's the key difference between the two?
Does that have to do with like when you hover over it or something?
Very simply, a paragraph is a paragraph. It's got padding before it and after it. So when you put a paragraph in your document and you put something in the paragraph and you have another paragraph that comes after that, they're going to look like paragraphs. They're going to be separated in the document by a little bit of margin and padding. Labels are not. Labels are just in line. They just flow right along with whatever text is there. So if you want, typically you would use a label next to a form element, or maybe a label as part of an image where you're trying to have some text that you might want to style or address. Excuse me, using CSS, and you want it to be included within another element or another collection of elements. But really, they're very similar. And then the span tag, which is this one here, which we didn't really talk about. The span tag really is there solely for you to be able to manipulate the contents of another container. It does nothing on its own. If you insert a span tag into a label or a paragraph, you won't be able to tell from the rendering of the HTML. But it's there because it allows you to use CSS or JavaScript to change the contents of that one section of the component very simply. And it has no formatting, so you don't get any margin or padding around that by default. Let's try it a little bit. Everybody break out your JS fiddle. And let's type a little as we go. Can everybody see that on the projector? I'll give you a minute to catch up here. Who just came in? Jonathan came in. Chase. Eric. Eric, you're there?
Yeah, I was in the mission.
Kevin and William. Okay. All right, so Kevin and William are both online students. Okay, so everybody with me on JS Fiddle? So here we have, we can do very simpler. We can do a paragraph, and we can say, this is paragraph 1, and then we can do another paragraph that says, This is paragraph 2. Okay. Then when we run these, we can see that I'm getting some spacing. I get spaces in between those automatically. This is padding or margin that is occurring automatically as part of the paragraph tag. Okay. Notice because I'm not using JavaScript and CSS currently, I've gone ahead and I've gone to the settings up here on JS Fiddle, and I'm using the tabs view, okay, which just gives me a little more space to type my HTML, okay. So you have a bunch of different choices here, classic, columns, whatever you want to use here. So you can pick the one that's right for you or for whatever you're working on, okay. I'm going to go ahead and tidy that up by clicking the tidy button, just to keep my indentation clean. Okay. If I come here and I type a label, say this is label 1, and then I do another label. Then when I render those by running, notice they are just together. So just by virtue of having a label, I don't get any new line. I don't get any padding above or below those tags. Okay. I can put a label inside a paragraph. Control space for, oh yeah, so you get a list of, yeah. Oh, that's very nice. I didn't know that was there. So control space gives you a list of tags here. All right, I apologize for the coughing. I know it's messing up the recording. Okay. So here I can put a label. This is a label inside a paragraph. This is text outside the label. So now when we run that, we see that while I get the separation of my paragraph from the label above it, so here where it says this is text outside of the label, this is being rendered inside my paragraph. So I'm getting some separation from the label element that comes above it. But the label that's inside my paragraph is just being rendered as any other text in the paragraph. Okay? And then a span. When you run that, you can't tell. It looks identically to anything else. And the span is really there to allow you to apply some specific styling there. Generally, you would use a span when you are looking for one of those less common codes, the strike through. You want to do a highlight or a background or something like that. Typically, you would use a span for that in your code, in your HTML document, and then apply CSS to that, as opposed to using a specific markup, an emphasis or a mark here. Okay. So here, for example, I can come in and I can say, if I give that a class, let me tidy that up. If I come into my CSS and I gave it a class of yellow, I can come in here and I can say background color yellow. So then when I run that, I'm formatting my span. Okay? That would be as opposed to using the mark or some other type of tag there. Okay? Either one works. They're both going to be, those formatting tags are going to be accepted by modern browsers, but just as an approach to keeping your structure of your document separate from your presentation of the document, you're going to want to use these kinds of you're going to want to separate these and use the more modern container tags. Okay? All right. Yes, sir.
Does it accept colors like purple?
There are a list of colors there. We'll get into colors more when we go, but there's a bunch of colors here. Let's see, does command space work here too? No. So there's like purple. Let's see, is there a purple? There's a purple. There's like a light gray, I think it is.
Did you say hex codes too?
You can type hex codes, and so there's a handful of built-in. Let's see what CSS built-in colors. Let's see what we find. 147 color names. Here's olive, so here's a list of them. So here's an example. Here's some example of what these are the words that you can use. That gets you some basic colors. There's and we'll talk more about this when we get into CSS. But this is the site that I use primarily for picking colors. This is called Color Hex, and so here you can come in and you can say, show me the whatever this color is. This color is going to be blue. And then I can get the hex codes and all the various codes that I can use to describe this particular shade of blue or purple, whichever you call that. And then also down here I can get shades and tints. So I'm coming up with a color palette. I can come up with a standard color, a standard blue or purple that I want to use. And then if I want to use a shade or a tint so that I can get a little bit of highlight or when I hover over it, or maybe I want to use a drop shadow and I want some corresponding colors, I can use Color Hex to get shades and tint of my primary color. Okay, but we'll cover all that. I'm jumping ahead. When we get into CSS, we'll dive more into that. But yeah, there's a bunch of things that you can type in here. This one, burly wood. I saw that one when we were looking. What color is that? Looks like an orangey brown, maybe. Okay. All right. So here we have some quick examples of those simple text container tags. Okay, if we go back to our slides, so the most common container tag that we're going to use in this class is the div tag. Okay, the div tag serves as dividing up your document into sections so that you can apply style to that and manipulate it using CSS and JavaScript. Okay, so you want to have a div tag anytime you want to position elements in a specific place on the screen, either absolutely on the screen in a specific place or relative to other elements. You're going to want to use a div tag to wrap those around. Okay, so the div tag is going to be very, very important. Okay, the div tag by itself. I'm just going to erase all of this. The div tag by itself renders nothing. Okay, so if I put in a div tag, there's nothing there. It is simply a container. It's not visible, and its default size on the page is 0 by 0 if there's nothing in it. Okay, so if I come here and I say, let me put a paragraph here, and then I'll put another paragraph at the after. So if I run this, we see that, oops, I put an X in the div. So if I run this, I see that there's a div in between those two paragraphs, but because there's no content in the div, it takes no space on the page. Okay. Now what I want to do, what I want to put in my div tags, I want to put them around my paragraphs. Okay. So now that I have a div inside the paragraph, I can now apply style to that if I want to. So I can come in here and say my div, I'm going to give it the burlywood background. Okay. And you see that now by default the div, if I don't say what size it is, it's going to span the entire length of the page. I can also do things now like align text. Okay, so now you see me using that div tag as a way to be able to manipulate the contents of the other elements that are inside that. Okay, this is what I was talking about at the beginning, where we're going to start nesting a lot of tags here. Okay, so generally every major component of your of your page, every major section of your page, is going to be in a div tag. Okay, that's just kind of the way it is. And you can even have div tags within div tags. So if you have a complex element that's maybe a panel on your screen and it's got a drop-down box and maybe a table inside of it and some text, it's likely that you'll have multiple nested div tags there. And so you got to be really careful when you're coding these by hand, because they can, you've got to make sure that you keep them balanced, so that whenever you open a div, that you have a corresponding closing div, keeping your indentation good in between with all those tags, and making sure that you are nesting them properly. Okay, any questions about divs? No? Links. So links, the link is the A tag, or sometimes called the anchor tag. I don't know why it's called an anchor tag, but it's a link. And the href is where you link to. So href will typically be another HTML page, another URL somewhere on the website. There's also a mail to link here. So if you put mail to, then this will click. When you click this, it opens up whatever the default mail client is on the system, and addresses an email. Okay. You can also put parameters on the mail to, so you can pop up, have a default subject and a default content or body of the email as well. Okay. All of these are best looked up on W3 Schools. If you really want to know something, just type W3 School A tag. Okay. And you'll get there, and you'll have everything you ever wanted to know about the A tag, including all of its attributes. Okay. Whether this target attribute allows you to open a link in a new window. We all love that when we see that on the internet, right? Okay. So everything you ever wanted to know. So keep in mind, if you need to look up the structure or format of an HTML tag, W3 Schools is where you should start. It is a phenomenal resource for looking these things up. It gets a little bit of a bad rap on the internet, because I think it's been around for a long time, and it's pretty basic, but that's what we need, right? Is basic information about the tags. Okay. All right. What comes next? So images. We talked a little bit about images. You want to include on the image tag. There's a title or an alt attribute that if the image somehow doesn't render in the page, if the source of your image can't be found, then the browser will insert a little bit of text using the alt or the title tag. Those are also used by some of the screen readers. So for people that have limited sight, you can put in a description of what the image is, and the screen reader will describe the image as the user walks through the page using their screen reader. Okay. Here's the distinction between a relative path, and an absolute path. So a relative path like this, where you are not starting with HTTPS, where you're just starting with a directory link or a file name directly. This is a relative path, meaning that it's going to try to pull up, or it's going to insert the protocol and the domain name from whatever page is being rendered. So if I'm on www.mysite.com and I have this relative path of images/images, then this is going to attempt to load https www.mysite.com/images. Okay? So this is known as a relative path. Relative paths are very good in that it saves you a lot of typing, so you don't have to put the entire URL and protocol and domain in there. Two, if you are using a site where you're running the site on multiple URLs, so you have maybe a testing site, a demonstration site, or a development site, so you're running it on your laptop, or you have a Q&A site for your team or something like that before it goes public. This, using the relative path, will allow you to draw in all of those external resources on different domain names without having to change any of your code. As a rule, I use relative paths whenever I can. An absolute path will typically be something where you are wanting to pull in a document from an external source. So where you're pulling in something that's not on your site, you'll see a lot of these when we use something called CDNs, which is a content distribution network. These are places where common files, so maybe you have a lot of images that you're using frequently between multiple sites. You might put them on an image site that is designed for storing and rendering images very rapidly. There's also CDN sites for common JavaScript libraries and CSS libraries for like jQuery and Bootstrap and the other tens of thousands of libraries that are out there where you can, you don't have to store all of that information on your own site. You can just pull it from a permanently available CDN. Okay, so using an absolute path is typically for rendering things from outside your site. Did anybody have any trouble with the image tag? Do we need to do an example of that? You can also put a width and a height on your image tags. Again, these are attributes that are built in onto the tag that are best used in CSS when possible. There are some instances when you might want to use a specific width and height attribute on your image tag. But generally, you're going to want to, this is now presentation, right? Because we're talking about the size and shape of an image. So you're typically going to want to do that through CSS. It is worth noting that anytime you adjust the width of an image, the height of the image is also adjusted automatically to be relative of the perspective of the image, of the ratio of the image. So if your image is 300 by 300 and I say I want the width to be 100, it's going to pick a height that has the same ratio as the original image. So in that case, your height would be 100. Okay? If your image is 300 by 500, 300 wide by 500 tall, and I pick a width of 100, then I'm going to get a 3 to 5 ratio on my height. So it will keep set the height automatically to maintain the perspective of the image. If you set the width and the height yourself, then you run the risk of distorting the image, right? If you get the ratio off. Okay. You can also put an image in a link. So here we have an A tag, which is the link tag. We have an href. This is going to go to Google. Inside, instead of putting text inside the link, we put an image tag, and that in effect makes the entire image a link. Okay, let's go ahead and try that one on JS Fiddle. So let me go to my CSS here. I'm just going to delete that. So let's just start a tag here. Start a link tag. We'll go to Google. So if I render this, I get a link and it says take me to Google. And we can see down at the bottom, in the very bottom left of the screen, my link is going to go to Google. I'm not actually going to click it because, well, I guess I can open in a new tab. And we're on Google. Voila. Okay? So if we wanted to put an image in here, so now instead of text, I just indent and I can put an image and I can say my source. Okay? I have this URL here. From the slides. I don't know if this works or not. Let's find out. It doesn't? So I don't know where I got that, but that was, this was from Google's old URL shortener, which they shut down last year. So that's why that doesn't work anymore. See what happens when you reuse your slides year over year? So if I come in here, we can see where does this image come from. This is the Google image. So I can just say, I can right click on this, okay? And then I can say copy the image address. And now on the clipboard, I have whatever the URL of that image is, supposedly. So let's see if that works. So now I can come in here. Okay. So here's the URL for that particular image. So now when I render it, I get a link. And now you can see when I hover over that image, I'm gonna go to Google. Okay. So you can put anything in this link tag. I mean, I could put, I could put a paragraph in here. And then when I run that, I'm going to get, at that point, it really just looks like text at that point, right? But maybe if I could put in, maybe inside my link, I might want to be able to click on an entire region of the screen. So I might use a container. I might use a paragraph and add some padding around that so that the paragraph is bigger. Maybe it's a big square. And so I can click anywhere in the paragraph tag itself, above or below the text. So I can use these, I can use the container quality of the link to make a link that's clickable in various ways, right? That looks more than just a simple hyperlink. Okay. All right. Any questions about that? No? We're moving pretty quick. This is really should be review at this point. Horizontal rules, these are just lines. Did anybody put a horizontal rule on their tag? It's not particularly exciting. Here's a line. There's a line, horizontal rule. So I can use these if I want to put separation in between elements. You'll see some horizontal rules when you're coding. A lot of times what you'll use instead of a horizontal rule, if you want separation between elements, is you'll use the border attribute of an element so that I can make the top or the bottom border of a container visible using shading or lines of some kind, which is what happens when you're in Excel or in a spreadsheet and you want to draw boxes. You're using the border quality of the cells as opposed to inserting new data. Horizontal rules or borders, depending on what your application is, work well. Okay? All right. Any questions about that? That's very simple, high-level stuff. Like I said, if you want to know how to do something, go to Google and Google it. How do I draw a line on the screen in HTML? Right? How do I make text bold? How do I make two paragraphs align side by side? Okay? You can do all of that. If you Google any of that, you're going to find something in HTML that's going to tell you how to accomplish that task. Okay? So now I want to talk about forms. So your homework assignment this weekend, or for the rest of this week, is about forms. So let's talk about what a form is real quick. Anybody want to take a big guess at what a form is? Not everybody at once. Don't talk over each other. Form is really just a bunch of text boxes and things on the screen that you can interact with to give information to the web page. Okay? It's like a form. When I give you a form on a piece of paper, what do you do with it? You fill it out, right? So when if I present you a form on an HTML document, what are you going to do with it? Fill it out, right? So it's really a form. So this is the simplest form that we can come up with. It's really a text box with two buttons. Okay? Text box with two ways to submit the form. Okay? What are some other forms? If we go back to our Chase example, here we have a form that is here's a login form. It has a text box for the username. Then it has a special kind of text box called a password box that when I type in this, we get a mask on it. Okay? Now just because you can't see this doesn't mean that somebody can't get the data, right? If the data is here, so if I come in here and I type secret password, okay? Nobody can see that, right? Because it's masked with asterisks. But all I have to do is inspect the page here. And I don't know if you can see that, but right here, in this content here, somewhere is the secret password I typed. Okay, so just because it is being it's being masked here doesn't mean it can be that it's hidden. And there are methods, and I think this page was actually using one. There are methods that will further mask the contents of that site inside the source, but it's there, and you can't hide it from me. If you put it on the screen in a browser, it's mine. If I'm using the browser, I can get all of it. So there is no way to prevent me from accessing the structure or the contents of your document.
So if you have viruses, your user
If you put it in a web page, then the person that you send that web page to has full access to everything in that document, period. Okay? And you cannot prevent that. You can turn off things like right-click on the page and You can do some of that stuff using JavaScript, but those are just that's just obfuscation. You cannot prevent me from getting the content of your page, period. Okay? So you can use obfuscation to make me think that I can't get it, but you can't prevent me. Okay? So those are forms. So let's talk about the structure of a form. Okay? A form is a nested container. Okay? So you're going to have a form. You declare the form using the form tag. Okay? And that is the beginning and the ending of the form. Okay? So the entire form rests in between the beginning and the ending of the form tag. Okay? You can, inside the form, you have inputs. And these are the text boxes and the radio buttons and the check boxes that you put inside your form. Okay? Those are inputs. You can also group inputs together using field sets. And you can use the legend, which gives you a little bit of a label on a field set. Okay? So we can do some examples. So first of all, so we're going to do some examples here and make some forms as we go. Your homework assignment is going to be to make a form. Okay? Let's make sure we don't run out of time so that we can go over the homework assignment. Okay? So first of all, on the form method gets some attributes. Okay? The form has a method and an action, okay, which is can be used. We will not be using these in our example, okay. But essentially, the method and the action tells your browser what to do with the form when I click the submit button, okay. What do I do as a browser if there's a submit button on the form and you click it, okay? It goes back to the method and the action on the form tag to say what the action is. Generally, the action is to take the data from the form and send it to a URL somewhere. Okay, and then the method is, do I use a get or a post, which just really describes how is the data packaged and transmitted. Okay, a get, the data is going to be included in a query string on the URL. So if you look at a query string here, if we go to Google and I type search text. Notice how my URL changes up here. I get this big old long URL. So now what starts right here at the question mark. So all of this is the URL, is the address. The protocol, HTTPS, the domain, www.google.com, and the path /search. That's the structure of the URL. Everything that follows the question mark is the query string. Okay? The query string is a key value pair that gives me the variable name or the parameter name here. There's an equal sign, and then this is the contents of the parameter. Okay? And it goes all the way through to the ampersand. I know that might be a little hard to read, but that is that. So then after the ampersand, you begin a new parameter on the query string. Okay? So this is the way that a browser is sending contextual data back to the server so that when the server renders this page and sends it back to the client, it uses that context from the query string to say how should I render this page? Okay, basically what information goes on the page. Okay.
Always unique to the browser.
What was that?
So like the code, essentially the information you're sending in all of those letters and numbers, is that always unique to like the way it was made, or is that kind of a standard with all websites?
It varies. I'm guessing. I mean, if you could look at this and try to guess, right? You know what's being included here. So like here's an example of one. And if you use the Q parameter here, then you can default to search text. Okay. So if I come in here and I say google.com/ and I just put in and put that in, then I can default the search text. Okay. So but if you look at you looked at all of those, there were we didn't even get to the end of the URL there of the entire query string. There could be dozens of those parameters. Some of them looked like they were hash tags or some kind of encryption. I mean, I guess if we really wanted to know bad enough what they were being used for, we could figure it out. But some of it is just tracking data that Google uses. It might be so there is a technique on the URL to in some cases one of the see, look, I don't know, this is a very long URL. But like some of this data might actually be like a hash of the URL itself, so that the client can determine if, or the server or the client can determine if anything else in the URL has changed. So if I go in and manipulate the query string somehow, then I have a kind of a built-in verification on that, so that I can tell that the query string was changed. So maybe it's part of my security map or something like that. Okay, to prevent unauthorized use of my website. Okay, but those are query strings, and so that's the get function. The post function sends data to the server as well. It just doesn't do it on the query string, but it sends it as part of the HTTP request. So in a way that's not visible on the query string. It is still visible within the browser using the inspection, the developer tools and those inspection tools. It's just not on the URL. Okay. So in our homework example, we won't be using these, so we don't need to worry about that. Not all forms will have a submission definition built in. Sometimes you'll declare a form, and when you click a button, JavaScript will take over and will do something on the form, and you won't actually submit the form anywhere. You'll just collect the data using JavaScript and send it using JavaScript instead of by submitting the page. Okay? All right. Here are the input types. All of these look like text boxes. Text and password are text boxes that show up on the screen. We saw that on the chase.com form. The password button. Hidden is an input type that is information that's on the page that's not rendered anywhere. So that's there if you want to use that in a, maybe you want to have some additional data that gets submitted back to the server, or the server wants to put some information on the page so they can use that for context on a subsequent request. Just data that you want to use that's not rendered anywhere on the page. Radio buttons and checkboxes. We know what those are. The difference between radio button and checkboxes is checkbox, typically you can pick more than one, and radio buttons, you can only pick one, okay, from your group. And then you have buttons. You can have just a standard button, and you can have a special kind of button, which is a submit button, which triggers the action on the form. And then you have a reset button, which will which will just reset all of the contents of all of the inputs. Okay, let's try a little bit here. Okay, so I'm going to start with form. So I open my tag. Okay, always make sure when you're typing here that you always put your open and close tags in at the beginning. Always keep your blocks clean. Okay, I'm going to leave out the method and the action on the form tag because we're not really going to submit it anywhere. But let's say here I just want to put in. Let me put in input. I'm going to say type equals text. Okay, and then when I run that, I get a form with a text box. Okay, if you come back here, we can see I get an input tag. I have an attribute of the tag, which says what kind of input it's going to be. Okay, so generally I'm going to want to include some kind of label with that. So I might put a label here. I'm going to say, enter your name. Okay? So then I get my label here and then with my text there. So if I want the label before or after the input, then I just need to put it in. I just need to put it such in my code here. So now I'm going to do an input, and I'm going to come back here and I want to look at. Let's do some checkboxes. Okay. So now if I come back to JS Fiddle and I can say type equals checkbox. Okay. Now when I render that, I get a checkbox here. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and just put a line break in there for now so that we can get it on a separate line. There's my checkbox, right? There's nothing there, but here I'm going to put a label after it that says 1. And then I'm just going to copy that. And this will be 2. And this will be 3. Okay? And so here are my checkboxes. So now when I click each one of those, I can. Okay. Now here's a trick question. So if I want to determine which of those checkboxes was clicked and which one wasn't, using this HTML, how would I know? How do I know that right now, from inside my document, how do I know that it's checkbox 3 that was checked? We haven't submitted it, right? But they're all the same. There's nothing that really distinguishes those values except that one of them comes first, second, and third, right? So I could look at the order of the text boxes, right? But typically what you would want to do here is you would want to include another attribute right here that is the name. Okay. So now when I get so now when I submit this form to my server, I get a little bit more metadata with that so that I can determine what was checked, which of the checkboxes was checked. Okay. Let's do a radio button. I'm going to do another break here. Input type equals radio. Let me tell you that. This will be 2. This will be 3. Right, so I can run that. And now I get these checkboxes, these radio buttons. Okay? But generally when I have radio buttons, I want them to be, I only want to be able to pick one of them. Radio buttons in general, a group of radio buttons is meant to be, you can select one of these options, whereas checkboxes means you can pick any number of the options. It doesn't have to be that way, but that is a common approach. Let's see. Did I put that note in here? No, I didn't. So you can use that by you can specify them as all being one group by using the name tag here. I think it's the name tag. Okay, so now when I click this, I get either of them, but I can't click them both. Okay, and here for 3, because it doesn't have the name attribute, it's a separate. It's actually a separate list of text boxes. Okay, so I can say 3, and we'll make this one 4, and we'll give that a name of radio 2. Okay, so now when I run this, this is one set of radio buttons that are exclusive to each other. This one is a second set. So I can pick either 1 or 2 and either 3 or 4. Okay, but I can't pick 1 and 2 because I've put them in the same name group. Okay? I can also default them to being checked here by using the checked attribute. Okay? Which means that by default, when the page renders, that text box or that radio button will be checked. Okay? Everybody got it? Any questions? Can I make this tab smaller? It'd be nice if that tab on the left would go away. There's some way to do that, I'm sure. Okay. All right. Yeah, let me point that out. There's a setting here in JS Fiddle, and this is built into VS Code, but there's a setting here called Highlight Matching Tag. I would encourage you to turn this on because it's useful. And what it does is when you come in here to your element, if you click on a tag, it will tell you, if it's a container tag, it will tell you where the opening or closing match is. Okay? So that you can, if you're working on indentation or you have a complex form, you can make sure that you are keeping your tags in balance. Okay? All right. Let's see. So let's do, so here are some common attributes of the input that we used. So we have name, right? So this further describes the which, you know, if you have a particular text box, you can use an ID or you could use a name to describe that. If you have radio buttons or a checkbox group, you can use name to define those. Value is going to be the default value of a text box. Placeholder is that little kind of grayed out text that appears when the text box is empty. So let's do one of those. So here I can say, I'm going to do an input text here, and I'm going to, for my name, I'm going to do placeholder equals name. I'll just say Bill Neely, okay? So then when I run that, I see I get this little grayed out section here. When I focus on that and begin typing, the placeholder goes away, okay? So we use that as prompt text, or if I'm trying to give you some guidance as to what you should enter here, or the format maybe. So maybe if it's a phone number, for example, if I want to say, let me copy that, and say, enter your phone number. And I can say, I want a specific format here, 210-555-1212. Okay? I can give you some guidance in here as to maybe a particular structure I'm looking for, or maybe the kinds of words I'm looking for. And so that's just placeholder. Once I begin typing, the placeholder goes away. Okay? And then if the text box is empty, the placeholder comes back. Okay? The value tag, I can use an input. Type equals text. And I can use the value attribute. So that will be loaded into the text box automatically when the page renders. So this is not placeholder text. This is actually the value of the text box at this point. And so if I erase this, and then I can type something else, whatever I want to type there. But if I erase it, then it's gone until the page renders again, unlike the placeholder, which will come back. The placeholder is not actually in the text box. It's just displayed on top of it. Okay? All right. Questions about forms and form elements. Max length and size. So if you have a max length, say if I have a text box and I only want you to be able to enter 10 characters, I can say max length of 10, and then you can't enter more than 10 characters. Okay? The size is going to be the width of the text box. So everything's going to have a default value. But here if I come in and say, I'm just going to say size equals 40. I don't know what the default value is here. Okay? Then we can see that my text box is now a lot bigger. That looks to be about 20, I would guess. 20 pixels probably, or whatever. It's probably more than 20 pixels. 20 characters probably. It's probably actually the default size is going to be based on the default font size of your, it's probably 20 characters in whatever the default font size is of the page. Okay? Yes, sir.
Can you please nest the style attribute in one of them, like for the position?
So like, give me an example of
My
what.
question is that, like, when you give a style attribute, like 10 pixels from the top,
Mm-hmm.
like 80 pixels from
Okay.
the top.
Sure, so let's do this. So here, why don't we say, we've got an input here. So and notice that when in between my input and the label, there's really no space there. Okay? So if I wanted to come in here in my CSS, and I want to say for inputs, put a padding on the left side of 10 pixels. Now when I run this, we'll notice that right here in between the label and the input. So here I'm going to add padding to the left side of this input box. So they're all going to shift. Okay? 10 is not enough. Let's do 50. Okay? So now we see, oh, actually, I'm sorry, padding is inside the element, margin is outside the element. So now what we've done is we've made the text box bigger, and now there's 50 pixels of padding between the edge of the text box and the content of the text box. If I wanted to make separate the outside, I need to use margin. Okay? And now they're separating. Okay? So we'll get to that when we get to CSS. Padding is inside the element from the boundaries of the element and the content of the element. Margin is between the boundary of the element and the things that are around it. So outside the element versus inside the element. But we'll cover that more as when we get into CSS. Okay? But let's go ahead and nest. So let's take a quick look. Let's see, we have selects here, text area. Okay, so let's do this real quick, and then we'll go over the example. Another thing I can do here is I can use something called a field set. Okay, field set is a container tag. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create a field set, and I'm going to, actually, let's start a new one just to, so that we don't get confused here. So if I come in here and I say, and I create a form, I can group my fields together using a field set. And inside my field set, I can put an input here. Okay. Now when I render this, I get a little boundary. So now field set is now a container. Okay. So nested inside my form is a field set, and inside the first field set is a single text box. Okay. I can create another field set here, and I can put a radio button. Okay. And so now that's going to be in a separate field set. Okay. I have an attribute of the field set called the legend, which is a container tag. And I can say text boxes. Radio buttons. 2 T's and buttons. And so then I get a legend that appears as part of the border of the field set. Okay? So this lets me nest that form and put some structure into the form, so that then I can come back and I can apply styling to the field sets. I can put space in between the forms. Maybe I want to put some padding in between the different field sets. Maybe I want to change the color of the border, things like that. I can also put an image here. So if we go back to Google and we say, give me the address of this image, I can put an image in my legend. Tidy that up. Now when I run that, I can get an image as my legend. Okay, so this is a little bit of nesting here. What time does class end? 12:05, right? Okay, so we get field sets and legends. Let's do another one. Let's do field set. And here, so let's do a select box. So this is a drop-down box. Okay. So I'd use a drop-down by using select. So again, I'm going really fast because our class is short. So here's there's a slide on selects. You can also get this. Where on the internet would you go to look up how to do a drop-down box? W3 Schools. Look for the select box. Select is a combination tag using select and options. So the select defines the drop-down box. This puts a drop-down box there. Options are what's in the drop-down box. Okay. So we can define a select here, and then I can use an option for each thing I want in the box. If I don't define any options, I'll get a select box. There's just nothing in it. Okay. So here I can say, give me an option for, I think it's value 1, and then I can say 1 here. And then I can say option value equals 2. Select is a container tag, so now when I run this, I get 1 and 2. But notice that when I type the value here, so I can say the label of the select is 1, but the value is 1 with the lowercase o. So I might use, I might have a phrase here for, maybe this is going to be, the value here is going to be, first. The value here is going to be second. Okay? So then if I have more human readable text here, in my drop-down box, something that is more legible to a human, but using the value contents in the option block, that's the data that will actually get sent back to the server. So if I pick the second option here on my drop-down box, now the value of this input element is now second. Okay, it's not this is the second choice or the second option. It's just whatever the value attribute is. Okay, so that allows me to put smaller, more kind of easier to programmatically use data in my forms as when it's submitted back to the server, and then put nice human readable text on the screen. Okay, last one is a text area. Anybody want to take a guess at what a text area is? Text area is just a bigger text box, multi-line text box. Okay, so I can type in multiple things. Chrome lets me drag and drop them sometimes. It's not letting me do it here, but so I can put in multi-line text box. Okay, and here I can use calls equals 10. Let's do calls equals 50. Rows equals 10. I need those in parentheses or in quotes here. And then I can make it bigger. So now I get 10 rows visible by default in 50 columns. Okay? Again, you can do that with CSS as well. Okay? All right. So in this fiddle between those two fiddles was all of the tags that you're going to need for your homework assignment. Okay? We didn't do a button, but there is no button in your homework assignment, so we'll come back to that. So let me go ahead and save these. Okay, so those are going to be in my fiddle library, which is linked in the one of the modules. There's a link to my fiddle library. Okay, so you should be able to find that. Let's see if we have time. This is a quick form. If we have time, we'll do it. We've kind of already done this a little bit. This looks like an embedded field set, right? Okay, let's look at the assignment. The assignment is here, nested HTML form elements. Okay? So you have to use all of these tags. Okay? And you have to create something that looks like this. So it's going to look, there's a link here to an image. It's going to look something like that. Okay? So what does this look like to you? It looks like one form, right? Top to bottom. And then inside the form, this looks like a field set, right? And then inside that field set, there's another field set. Okay? Inside that field set, there's a third field set. And inside that field set are some text boxes and a label. Now, also nested inside the second field set, there's another field set here, which is outside of this text of this first one, but still nested inside these first two. Okay? That has this in it. That has a password box. Okay? Then you have a text area, a drop-down, some radio buttons, some checkboxes and some radio buttons, and then some hidden fields. Okay? Hidden fields just have type equal hidden. Okay? And whatever data you put in that, you just can't see it. Okay? But if you look up hidden fields on W3 Schools, you'll get some examples. Okay? So you have to create an HTML document that looks like this when I load it in my browser. Okay? Are there any questions about that? So there's a list of tags here that you're going to need to use. Form, obviously the whole thing is a form. We had field sets. How many field sets do you see in the image? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9 field sets. 2 big ones here that are nested, and then a bunch that are nested inside the third. Okay? 9 field sets. You're going to have to use a legend and a label. How many legends are here? There's one in each field set, right? Where are the labels? Here's a label. Here's a label. Right here, that's a label. That's a label. Where are the inputs? We have input, type text, password, radio, checkbox, hidden. This is a text input. What does it look like it has in the back here? Looks like placeholder, right? This one appears to have a default value. Okay? Here's a password. So if we typed in here, we'd get the asterisk mask. This is a text area, so multi-line. Okay? Here's a drop-down with some options. Okay? This looks like a combination of this is a label, this is an input of type text box, or type checkbox, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, those are radio buttons. This is a label, this is an input of a radio button, this is a label, this is an input of radio button, of radio, this is a label. This one is a label, is an input of radio, and it has an attribute of checked, because when I load the page, it's checked by default. Okay? All right? So you can either submit a fiddle, a link to JS Fiddle, and you can send me that URL, or you can type this in an HTML document on your own and submit the HTML document. Okay? We have 4 minutes left. Are there any questions about that? So real quick, I want to show you. We'll jump into this on next Tuesday, but I want to show you how to create your own HTML file locally. So I'm using VS Code here. So I'm just going to go ahead and create a new file in VS Code. Okay. New file. So here's my file. Okay. So here I can just type. I can start typing my document. I'm going to go ahead and save that. I'm just going to save it, and because once I give it an HTML, I'm just going to put it on my desktop. Okay. Once I save that, I'll start getting some context formatting. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and close that HTML tag. I can do a head here. I'll put a title. I'll put my body. In here, I'm going to put a paragraph. Okay. So now I save that. I just Control S to save that. So now this is an HTML document. Okay. Now, how do I render this? Right? I have to load this in a browser. Okay. Which I can do in a couple of ways. I can just go to my browser, and here I can type something using the file protocol. Okay. But I have to know the whole path. So here I can come in VS Code. I can just right-click on the tab, and I can click Copy Path, and that gives me the entire path to the file. Okay. So now when I type that in using the file protocol, did everybody see what I typed up here? Instead of typing HTTPS, I typed file : / which means now I'm going to render an HTML file on from my machine, and then I put in the path, and I'm rendered. Okay. I can also find it in my Finder. I can go here to my desktop, and here's my test HTML. I just double-click on that. It's going to open up in a browser window. Okay. So now if I come back to VS Code, I can say that I can add some more stuff. Paragraph 2. I can save that, and then if I just refresh this page, it automatically, I refresh that just using Control R, and so that, or I'm not sure what it is on Windows, F5, I think, maybe. So if you don't want to work in JS Fiddle and you want to work on your machine, then you can use this. Next week, your assignment's going to be a standalone HTML file. Okay, so if you want to start getting a head start on that, you can do this. Going forward, as we get into more and more complex pages, we're going to use, you'll be submitting HTML and CSS files, and you'll be using Fiddle really as just testing and experimentation. And then all of that will go into an HTML and CSS file. Okay? Which means if you're using a lab machine here, that you're going to need some kind of way of keeping track of those files if you're working in class. Okay? USB stick or email the files to yourself, or don't leave anything on these machines in the classroom if you have no guarantee we'll be here when you get back. Okay? Any questions about forms, about nesting? Making sense? Feeling pretty good about it? Any questions about your assignment? Okay? If you need help, you can email me and I will answer questions. Go to the W3 Schools and look at the form tags. Look at the form page on W3 Schools. It works great. W3 Schools also has this little try me function. So if I say W3 Schools forms, I'm going to get the link there. In many pages, you'll see this try it yourself box, which gives you a little code that you can work with. So it starts with something that's got a form here. Okay? So by default, this form is rendered, and you can run it and interact with it. At this point, it's kind of looking a little bit like JS Fiddle, right? I can come in here and I can change this. I can change this code. I can just type something here, and then when I run that, it's gonna update. Okay, but use that try it method, that try it function inside W3 Schools, gives you a starting point. So it's going to give you a little bit of an example that you can start to work with. Okay, unlike JS Fiddle, which is just a blank screen that you have to type yourself. Okay. All right. Any questions? All right. Midnight Sunday. We'll see you next Tuesday. Your assignment is also up for week 3, so if you are really eager to get started, you can jump in there.